Okay, so let's talk about something I think of as the Siren. This is again a kind of just a me specific thing that I like to think about, right? I call it the Siren because what I'm talking about is the E shape and the U shape. EU, EU, EU. That's what I call it, the Siren, right? So these two opposite shapes represent the kind of two most common extremes of what your mouth does in terms of the corner range, right? We talked about all of those shapes, all those muscles before, but the most common kind of like extremes that you kind of hit in dialogue or even just kind of in facial posing is E, which is a lot of tension pulled out wide, top lip up, bottom lip down, a lot of teeth. Right, it's a lot of things flexing, and U, which is that orbicularis fully flexed forward with the jaw slightly down. Right. So understanding the proper posing of each of these goes a long way in ensuring that your shapes are believable and that they transition well, and that you're respecting the volumes and anatomy of the face. Right. So one of the most important things, right, when we're talking about this is why I've shown a couple angles here. So far, we've mostly been kind of looking at the face from the front, right? But it's important to remember when you're moving the corners laterally for your wide shapes that they're actually moving back in Z space, right? This is not just pulling straight out wide most of the time. When we talk about graphic 2D shapes, there are shows where the face is quite flat. But in general, in a more humanoid mouth, when we're talking about the corners going wide, they're going this way. They're pulling back towards your ears, right? So you can see just how much range from default there is in these corners going back and forward in this EU. And that's why I kind of teach that EU, EU. If you look at the lips in relation to the nose, see how they're almost like fully behind the nose in the E, and they're actually out further than the nose in the U, right? So there's a lot of range there. And I see people kind of misunderstand this, especially when it's kind of not built into the rig for free, and stuff just kind of lives too flat and this kind of stuck, or the mouth is moving a lot, but it doesn't have any actual like Z depth. And so it's an important concept to remember and understand, right? And yeah, so it's they're going back when we do the E, and conversely, when they're coming narrow in any narrow shape, right? When that orbicularis oris is firing at all, the mouth is coming forward. So if it's puckering or even that type of one that we talked about, that type of thing, all these shapes are coming forward. So it's important to respect that. When you are doing the U shape, in this case, I'm going from the E to the U, you'll notice also that the jaw is dropping, and that's why we get no teeth in the U, right? It's like if I just did this with my teeth held together, you'd have teeth in the U, but the actual like E and U extremes that I'm talking about involve dropping the jaw some. So you kind of get a good clean graphic, like dark black mouth basically on that U. Some rigs do, like I say, they do a pretty good job of this. Like, they have it aligned in such a way that when you move those corners, they're already kind of going back in space. And when you kind of pucker, that there's a little bit of that forward. But I give this note a lot. And so a lot of, I think that even with the kind of whatever's built into the rig, sometimes you still have to do some muscle work to get it to actually come forward as much as it actually would in real life. And another thing to remember, right? When we're talking about volume, right? As the lips stretch that wide into the E, they actually thin out, right? We're stretching it. And so they're getting pulled, and to show that tension, you're getting kind of a straight upper lip, and the lips are kind of thinning, versus when they ooh, that's a squash. And so you have a lot of kind of lip mass, right? That's all kind of squeezed up here together. So you see here that they're actually getting quite a bit fatter as they ooh, and then they kind of thin out as they E, right? And so all of these concepts of E and ooh are just useful to remember as you're making any of your shapes. So if you're making a tense shape that has the mouth pulled wide, whether it's E or not, right? It can be low corners or whatever. We should be thinking about, is it pulling back in space? Is it thinning out the lips? And then if you're making a narrower shape, even if it's not as narrow as ooh, but it's something along that spectrum, along that continuum, right? Can we pull it forward some? Can we build up a little volume in the lips, or a sense of that if the rig allows, right? So yeah, plumping them and kind of increasing the thickness as they squash really helps to kind of give a sense of volume preservation as we're kind of squashing and stretching that. They also roll out slightly as you pucker, right? So a lot of rigs have like a roll control. So there's kind of like a, kind of as you pucker, there's like a little kind of rolling out of the lips that happens as well. If you don't do these things, stuff can just feel a little disjointed, and it just feels a little less anatomical if you're like just bringing in the corners but not bringing them forward and not kind of like rolling them out. It doesn't feel like that muscle kind of tightening against them, right? So again, a lot of this whole class is based off of getting more appeal and connectivity in the face by respecting the underlying anatomy as much as makes sense for the style of the show that you're doing. All of these things can be bent and adjusted based on the show. Sometimes they don't come into play, but when they do, it's helpful to at least be starting from like a foundation of understanding what's happening. So that way, if you're analyzing your reference or whatever it is, you know what to kind of pull from, what to keep and what to strip out or maybe simplify, right? So here's with some of the controls on, so you can see some of the other stuff I'm doing, right? Because I'm clearly not just doing the mouth here. So don't forget to involve the cheeks, the nose, and the lower lids. We're going to talk a little bit about that more next class, that kind of like second. Remember I talked about like the primary regions of the mask and the muzzle, but then the secondary regions of like this whole kind of middle section. So we're going to spend some time talking about that more next class. But yeah, don't forget, as that mouth is pulling wide, the nose is actually pulling wide as well. You get a little bit of sneering, and then as it goes on the ooh, it's actually pulling out. Let me go back a slide. You actually see, even as he does the ooh, that those nostrils are kind of coming down and in, and that nose is actually kind of like rotating up a little bit as the lips kind of pull out away from the face. And so respecting those relationships as well can go a long way in terms of making it feel like it's muscles underneath there when appropriate. So it'll help those transitions and preserve volume in the face. And like I said, a lot of shapes live along this spectrum. So even things that aren't fully, that's why I kind of start from those extremes of like, if you can build a good E and build a good ooh on your character, that's going to go a long way in terms of like, okay, now we're going to do a medium shape that's maybe not that wide, but not that narrow. And it's just kind of in the middle. And you can kind of figure out where it needs to live along that line.